Now, Russia has big plans in Africa, particularly in mineral resources, like in the Republic of Congo, where oil multinational Lukoil is involved in a natural gas development project. In Sudan and the Central African Republic, a close ally of President Putin has secured mining licenses for gold. In Guinea, Russian aluminum producer Rusal is digging up bauxite, a rock that contains high levels of aluminum. And in Zimbabwe, Russia wants to get into platinum mining via a company called Afromet. Well, until now, Russia has seen relatively muted trade with African countries. Exports and imports to the entire continent were valued at only around $20 billion last year. In comparison, China had over 10 times that amount. Africa's largest trading partner during that time was the EU, with nearly $340 billion total in that period. Russian officials have said that in the medium term, they want to triple trade with African countries. It might be helpful that Russia is still seen as a partner without heavy colonial baggage.
These flashes fight infections. Medical devices created by the Russian company Melita generate ultraviolet light that kills dangerous bacteria in minutes. The company, which was founded by doctors, has been producing these units by hand in Moscow for nearly 15 years. They started selling the devices in South Africa 2 years ago and say they're competing with European and US companies for the African market. We aren't afraid of competition. Our prices are more competitive and our quality is high. And we produce our own bulbs for the equipment. We also have more experience using these devices in the medical sphere than anyone else worldwide. Melita is one of a handful of companies that builds machines like these. The edge they could have in the African market is exceptional for a Russian firm. In overall trade revenue with Africa, Russia lags far behind competitors like China, India and the US, even if it has doubled its trade with African countries in the past 5 years. Russia doesn't have a strategy on the African market, and so we see a hectic back and forth from one area to another. Chinese interests in Africa are widespread, and they're universal. Russia can't compete with them. But representatives at Melita are more optimistic. They hope their medical equipment will shine at the Russia-Africa summit and allow them to lock in new business on the continent.
My colleague Chiponda Chimbalo is here to talk more about this. Chiponda, what is Russia focusing on in Africa economically? Critics say it's mostly about selling weapons and increasing its geopolitical footprint.
Well, I mean, you pointed out before, the report, of course, is also focusing on mining, the mining industry. And the energy sector is another area that it's focusing on. And the defense industry, obviously, which has been looked into by a lot of experts and criticized a lot. But those are the three main areas it's focusing on, and for various reasons. But a lot of people point to the geopolitical footprint, increasing its footprint on the African continent by having relations with countries where it could maybe later on have access to mineral resources and the like.
So there are similarities between the Russian intentions and what we're seeing with a major player like China doing in Africa.
In terms of similarities, there are areas, of course, maybe where that could overlap when it comes to like getting more UN support within the UN General Assembly, getting more support from African nations. That's something similar. But in terms of other intentions, is not quite the same way because, of course, China doesn't have natural resources like Russia does. So a lot of mineral resources that Russia is investing in Africa, it also already has itself. So that's not quite the same. And that's slightly different because Russia may just want to have a bigger share of the market on the global stage and also perhaps be able to control access to those resources at a later date. And
right.
That's something that experts keep on saying.
Speaking of markets, Russia is not one of the top 5 economies of the world. Can it compete with players like the EU, a gigantic market, like Russia, an even bigger market?
it can't compete. It doesn't have the deep pockets to do that. And that's why it's probably going in, providing arms to dubious governments or dubious regimes and that sort of thing. That's one reason to do that. Another reason, of course, is to look into areas that it could just focus on in terms of investment, like mining industry in specific areas where other countries may not necessarily always want to do business.
Russia is hosting its first Africa summit. Chiponda Chimbelu from DW Business giving his thoughts. Thank you, Chiponda.